The moment my brother stood up in that conference room and pointed at me, actually pointed, like I was a piece of furniture someone had accidentally left in the wrong room. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. And I thought, you have no idea what's sitting across this table from you. His name is Kevin. 3 years older than me, always louder, always more certain of himself than the evidence ever justified. Growing up in Oakville, he was the one our father took to Leafs games, the one who got the car on his 16th birthday, the one whose mistakes were called learning experiences, while mine were called typical. I stopped expecting fairness from my family a long time ago. What I didn't stop doing was preparing for the moment it would matter. That morning, I had driven 2 hours from Toronto in the rain. The offices of Whitmore & Associates on Bay Street are the kind of place that makes you straighten your jacket when you walk in. Marble floors, dark wood paneling, a receptionist who smiles like she's been paid specifically to make you feel small. My mother was already there when I arrived, sitting beside Kevin, their chairs pulled close together the way they always do when they're about to present a united front. My brother's wife, Sandra, sat on his other side, whispering something in his ear. She stopped when I walked in. I took the seat directly across from them. The reading of my father's will was set for 9 o'clock. Arthur Whitmore, the estate lawyer our father had used for 30 years, came in at 9:02 carrying a leather folder thick enough to suggest this was not going to be a short meeting. He set a glass of water in front of each of us without being asked. He had done this before. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know this is a difficult time." Kevin cut him off before he could finish the sentence. "Let's just get to it," he said. "We all know how Dad wanted things divided. The business goes to me. The Muskoka property gets split. Celeste, that's me, gets her share of the savings. Simple." Arthur looked at him over his reading glasses for a moment. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, "I appreciate the impulse to be efficient, but I will need to read the document as written. Your father was very specific." Kevin sat back, satisfied. He had already decided how this was going to go. He had spent the last 4 weeks deciding, calling me twice to get aligned, which is, Kevin speak for agree with whatever I've already decided. Both times I had listened. Both times I had said very little. He had interpreted my silence as agreement. He always did. My father built Hargrove custom millwork out of a rented garage in Hamilton when Kevin and I were in elementary school. By the time I was in high school, it was supplying custom cabinetry to residential contractors across southwestern Ontario. By the time I finished my MBA at Rotman, it had annual revenue just under $4 million and a line of credit at TD that my father was quietly struggling to manage. He never told Kevin that part. He told me because I asked. I had started asking questions about the business the summer I turned 24. I'd sit at the kitchen table after dinner and go through the financials with him, not because he invited me to, but because I just showed up one night with a yellow notepad and he didn't say no. My mother thought it was a phase. Kevin thought it was my way of trying to be the favorite. He said so, more than once, at family dinners, loud enough for me to hear from the other room. What I was actually doing was building a case. Arthur opened the folder and began reading. The first several minutes were standard. The Hamilton house to my mother for her lifetime, the Muskoka cottage to be split equally between Kevin and me, personal effects distributed by a handwritten attachment. Kevin was nodding, relaxed, one hand resting on the table. My mother was dabbing at the corner of her eye. Sandra was looking at her phone under the table, which told me she already knew all of this. Then Arthur paused and turned to a new page. Regarding Hargrove Custom Millwork, he read, "The business, its assets, and its associated liabilities are to be transferred in full to my daughter Celeste Ann Hargrove." The room went so quiet I could hear the rain against the window. Kevin's chair scraped back. "Excuse me," he said. "Not a question, a correction." Arthur continued reading. "This decision reflects my confidence in Celeste's financial acumen and her demonstrated commitment to the long-term health of the company. It further reflects certain financial arrangements made between Celeste and the company between 2019 and 2024, the full documentation of which is attached as Schedule C." Kevin stood up, fully stood up, both hands on the table. That is not right, he said. That is not, Dad would never. He looked at my mother, who had gone very still. Mom, did you know about this? She shook her head slowly. She genuinely didn't. That was the one thing I felt bad about, not telling her. But I had learned over many years that anything told to my mother was told to Kevin within 48 hours. I couldn't afford that. Mr. Hargrove, Arthur said, I understand this is a surprise. If you would allow me to continue. A surprise? Kevin's voice had gone up 2 registers. This is our family business. I have worked in that business. I grew up in that business. Celeste hasn't even, she works for a bank. He said bank the way some people say cult. She has nothing to do with Hargrove millwork. He looked at me then. Full eye contact, for the first time since I'd walked in. You did this, he said. You went behind our backs and you manipulated a dying man into changing his will. I looked at him the same way I'd looked at him when you walked in. Steady, quiet. Kevin, I said, please sit down. I will not sit down. Do you have any idea what this does to? We have employees. We have people who depend on that business. You don't know anything about running a millwork operation? Kevin, my voice was the same temperature as when I'd started. Sit down. Something in my tone made him pause. He sat, slowly, like he was doing me a favor. Arthur waited 2 full seconds before continuing. Schedule C, he said. Documents a series of secured loan agreements entered into between Celeste Hargrove and Hargrove Custom Millwork Inc., beginning in April 2019 and most recently amended in September 2024. The total principal advanced is $340,000. Under the terms of those agreements, Ms. $340,000. Hargrove holds a first-ranking security interest over all of the company's assets, registered under the Ontario Personal Property Security Act. Kevin made a sound I don't have a word for. The loans, Arthur continued, were used to retire the company's TD line of credit in 2020, fund the equipment purchase in 2021, and cover operating costs during the period of reduced revenue in 2022 and 2022. Repayment terms are outlined in full in the attached agreements. In the event of transfer of the business, all outstanding amounts are due and payable to Ms. Hargrove within 90 days, or the security interest may be enforced. He set down the page. In plain language, Arthur said, removing his glasses and setting them carefully on the folder, Ms. Hargrove is the company's primary secured creditor. She holds a registered PPSA lien against every asset the business owns, the equipment, the inventory, the receivables, the vehicles. The will transfer gives her ownership of the shares. The security interest gives her a prior claim on the assets regardless. In either case, the practical result is the same. Kevin was looking at me like I had just told him I was someone he had never met. Where did you get $340,000? He said. I saved it, I said, and then I lent it to Dad when he needed it, because the alternative was the bank calling the line and the business going under. You were in Kelowna that year, Kevin, at the wine festival. He had been. I remember because my father called me on a Tuesday night, voice tight and careful the way it only got when he was scared, and told me the TD account manager wanted a meeting. I had driven to Hamilton the next morning. I had sat at that kitchen table again, this time with 6 years of the company's financials and my own saving statements, and I'd worked out a plan. My father had cried, briefly, and then straightened up and never mentioned it again. That was his way. This is fraud, Kevin said. You set this up to steal the company. Kevin, that was my mother finally. Stop. Mom. I said, stop. She had her hands flat on the table. Her voice was very quiet and very firm in a way I had not heard from her in a long time. She was looking at Kevin, not at me. Let the man finish. Kevin closed his mouth. Arthur laid out the rest of it methodically, the way good lawyers do. No drama, just facts arranged in order. The loan documents were real, properly witnessed, registered with the Ontario government in the public PPSA registry where anyone could have looked them up at any time. My father had signed them freely and had, in fact, insisted on formalizing them properly because he did not want me to be left exposed if anything happened to him. She protected this family, my father had written in a letter attached to Schedule C, when this family did not protect her. The business goes to the person who saved it. Kevin's lawyer, he had brought one of course, because Kevin always thinks 3 steps ahead in the wrong direction, spoke up from the corner where he had been sitting quietly. He asked about potential grounds to contest. He used phrases like undue influence and capacity at time of signing. He was careful and professional, and I did not blame him for doing his job. Arthur listened politely. Then he opened a second folder. Miss Hargrove anticipated this possibility, he said, and has asked me to note several things for the record. First, the loan agreements were signed in 2019-2024, the earliest of which predates Mr. Hargrove's diagnosis by 2 years. Second, each agreement was independently witnessed and reviewed by separate counsel, Bergman LLP in 2019 and Nakamura and Cole in 2021 and 2024. Third, a capacity assessment was completed at the time of the 2024 amendment, a copy of which is in the package I'm about to give you. He slid a manila envelope across the table to Kevin's lawyer. Fourth, the PPSA registrations are a matter of public record and have been searchable since 2019. Anyone conducting due diligence on this company, anyone considering a future ownership claim, for instance, would have found them. He let that sit. Kevin's lawyer opened the envelope and began reading. His expression did not change, but he stopped shifting in his seat. The will can be contested, Arthur said, addressing Kevin directly now, not unkindly. That is your right. Courts in Ontario do hear these challenges, but the security interest is a separate matter and exists independently of the will. Even if you were to successfully contest the share transfer, which I want to be honest with you about, the grounds are thin. Miss Hargrove's secured position over the company's assets would remain. The equipment alone is registered against a $180,000 charge, the vehicles, another $40,000. You would be inheriting a business that owes its primary creditor $340,000 plus accrued interest, with those creditor rights held by your sister. Kevin looked at Sandra. Sandra was no longer looking at her phone. So what you're saying, Kevin said slowly, is that even if I fight this, you would own shares in a company that has a first-ranking lien registered against all of its assets, Arthur said. In practical terms, you would own a business that you would immediately owe a significant sum to your sister. The business could not be sold, refinanced, or materially altered without her consent as secured creditor unless the security were discharged, which requires her agreement. The rain had picked up outside. You could really hear it now. Kevin looked at me. Did Dad know? He said. Did he know exactly what he was doing to me? I thought about my father at that kitchen table, the way he looked when I showed him the numbers and told him I had a solution, the way he said, Celeste, I don't know how you figured all this out, like he was genuinely puzzled by me, like I was someone he had never quite managed to see clearly, and the way he said, a few months before he died, I'm going to make this right. Yes, I said. He knew. Kevin stood up again, but this time it was different. The energy was gone out of it. He pushed back his chair and walked to the window and stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking out at Bay Street in the rain. Sandra gathered her things quietly. Kevin's lawyer was still reading the capacity assessment. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. I didn't need her to. In the weeks after, there were conversations that needed to happen. Kevin did consult with his lawyer about contesting. I had expected that, and I was not angry about it. 3 weeks later, the lawyer sent a letter indicating that Kevin had decided not to proceed. No explanation. I didn't ask for one. I drove to Hamilton on a Thursday in early November, the week the first real snow came, and I walked through the shop floor at Hargrove Millwork for the first time as its owner. It smelled like sawdust and machine oil and the particular cold that comes into old buildings before the heat kicks on for winter. The floor manager, a man named Pete who had been with my father for 11 years, met me at the door with his arms crossed and a look on his face that said he was reserving judgment. Your dad used to call you the quiet one, Pete said. He wasn't wrong, I said. Said you were the one who understood how things actually worked. I looked at him. Did he say that? Pete uncrossed his arms. He said it a lot, actually. Near the end, he looked around the shop, at the guys running the CNC router, at the stacks of cabinet boxes staged for delivery. So what do you want to do with this place? I thought about the 4 years of balance sheets I had studied at that kitchen table, the $340,000 I had moved, carefully and without fanfare, from my own accounts into a struggling family business because someone had to and no one else was going to. I thought about Kevin at the wine festival. I thought about my father's voice on a Tuesday night, tight and scared and reaching for the person he knew would answer. I want to keep it going, I said, and I want to keep every single person on payroll. Pete looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once and handed me the keys. I keep coming back to that Tuesday night phone call, my father's voice tight and careful, and me already reaching for a notepad before he finished his first sentence. I didn't know then that I was setting something in motion that would take 5 years to fully land. I just knew that someone had to show up, and I was the one who answered. That's the part nobody sees when they look at a story like mine from the outside. They see the conference room, the lawyer's folder, my brother's face going slack. They see the ending and call it a win. What they don't see is every quiet Thursday evening at a kitchen table in Hamilton, going through numbers that weren't mine to fix, but that I fixed anyway. What they don't see is the restraint it takes to keep doing the right thing when no one is watching, when no one is thanking you, when your brother is at a wine festival and your mother assumes you'll be fine on your own because you've always been fine on your own. I think about integrity a lot now, not as an abstract idea, but as something I watched my father practice in his own imperfect way for 30 years. He built something with his hands and his stubbornness and a rented garage, and when it started to slip, he didn't hide it from me. He let me see it clearly. That honesty between us, even when it was uncomfortable, is what made everything else possible. The loans were legal. The documents were clean. But the foundation underneath all of it was that my father and I told each other the truth. What I had to bring to that table, literally and figuratively, was more than money. It was the willingness to understand something deeply before acting on it. I spent years learning how that business actually worked, not because anyone invited me to, but because I believed that understanding something properly was the only responsible way to try to help it. Kevin had opinions about the company for 20 years without ever reading a balance sheet. I think that gap between having opinions and doing the actual work of knowing is where a lot of families quietly fall apart. And then there's the part that's hardest to talk about, which is just staying in it, showing up when it's inconvenient. Lending money you saved carefully and not mentioning it at Christmas dinner. Driving 2 hours in the rain to a meeting you could have skipped. The accumulation of those small decisions, made consistently over years, is what actually changes outcomes, not one dramatic moment, not one clever move. Just the discipline to keep doing what you said you would do, even when no one notices and no one asks. Pete handed me those keys and I held them for a moment before I put them in my pocket. They weren't heavy, but I understood exactly what they weighed.